Well, for anyone who's a shareholder in a shipping company, I think that's encouraging to think about. Thank you, Henriette. It's actually a perfect segue to take us into our first panel of the day on technological change is your friend. And we realized that some of these panel topics had sort of Orwellian topics, names. And so we'll see how that plays out. George Pierot is our moderator, and I'll ask him to come up and introduce the panelists. George is at S&P and project finance broker at Jacq Pierot and Sons here in New York, and serves on the board of the Hellenic-American Chamber of Commerce. So, George, take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome my panelists to come join us. We've got Müge from the American P&I Club. We also have Evangelos from Skysail Advisors, Roberto from DeepSea, and Pierot from Massterly. Our panel is obviously about technology, as the name implies. But before we go into a few specific topics, I'd like to open up to each panelist to answer what impact will your company have in the technological change the industry is going to face over the next 5 years. Pia?
I will start. Well, as you see, I'm working for a company called Massterly. Nobody has heard about that. So it's a joint venture between Wilhelmsen and Kongsberg. Wilhelmsen is the leading ship owner, ship operator company, and Kongsberg is a technology provider for marine and also aerospace and defense. So we are specializing in autonomous ships, and it's not for ocean-going vessels at the moment. We are looking at short sea shipping. So the big change that our company will bring is actually being able to compete with trucks for short distances, because we're bringing the cost of the short sea shipping down and being able to shift transport from road to sea, which is going to be good for the environment, obviously. It's also going to be safer, and it's also going to create new jobs for the maritime community. That's the change that we're bringing.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Roberto Coustas, and I'm the CEO of DeepSea Technologies. So what we do at the moment is we use artificial intelligence algorithms to analyze data gathered from the vessel. So we gather data from the main engine, electrical generator engines, and we analyze the data to see if there is any problem with any of the key machinery or if any problem will occur in the future. Our long-term vision, though, is to connect the shipping management company on shore to every ship that sails thousands of miles away from its management company. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evangelos Efstathiou. I'm the founder and CEO of Skysail Advisors. If you look at shipping and the composition of shipping companies today, the competitive pressures on smaller, privately held, and family-owned businesses has never been greater. And what we see is, over the next 5 years, my vision is that we will develop the technology platforms and services that enable companies in shipping, through our deep relationships with ship owners, charters, and financial institutions to gather and unlock the value of their data capital, their knowledge and know-how, and channel that into leveling the competitive playing field. And our goal is to develop the tools that essentially, as map makers of the technology solutions in the industry, help companies adapt to thrive.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Müge. I'm working with the American P&I Club, which is one of the 13 mutual marine insurance associations, also known as P&I clubs, and they comprise the international group. P&I clubs cover ship owners' legal liabilities to third parties, including loss of life, injury to passengers and crew, wreck removal, oil pollution, cargo damage, collisions, or damage to fixed and floating objects. Well, we are not a technology company. However, we work with the new technologies as they are produced through the shipping. P&I industry is very unique in that the clubs were deliberately crafted for adapting and evolving together with the shipping industry, which means as technology evolves, so does the P&I to meet the needs of the ship operators.
Thank you. So our first topic is going to be autonomous ship. And the first question to Roberto, and then hopefully with follow-up from Pia, will be, will vessels ever be 100% autonomous?
Okay, thank you very much, George. The answer to that question, I think, is financial as it is technological, because a great misconception that exists is about these new technologies. They've existed for many years now, and the only reason why they haven't been adopted by commercial vessels is because of the risk induced by these new technologies, considering the very high value of the assets does not outweigh the cost of crew. Therefore, it will take some time until these technologies are robust enough for us to be able to apply them to commercial vessels. I believe autonomy will happen, though. It will just be a gradual process. So the first step will be to connect the ship with a shipping company, so gather data and know what's going on the ship. Then the second step will be to automate some very simple processes, such as fuel changeover, especially now that environmental regulations are being so strictly monitored by authorities. One could be the fuel changeover to low sulfur when one enters HACC areas. And at some point, as mentioned by Pia earlier, autonomy will exist, and first in smaller ships that do very small and repetitive journeys. And later on, I do believe, far off in the future, about 10, 20 years perhaps, to vessels that go through the ocean. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. And Pia?
No, now it is. So actually, there are already 100% autonomous vessels, but those are very tiny vessels or underwater vehicles that are mapping the seabed, for example. They can go for months autonomously on a pre-scheduled mission without any interference. But our company is also working with Yara. It's a big international company that is now building the world's first fully autonomous container vessel. It's a small vessel. It's 120 TEUs, 80 meters long. It's going to be going at 6 knots, quite close to the shore, and for very, very short distances, sailing like 7 to 30 nautical miles on a predefined route. It's just going to go on the exact same route every day. And this vessel is going to be 100% autonomous in the meaning that it's going to be unmanned. First, it's going to be manned for a period of maybe up to 2 years while we're testing every scenario on this route and every scenario that could happen to the vessel. And then we will actually remove the crew and have a shore-based crew supporting the vessel. So there's going to be some interaction, some possible interaction between the shore-based crew and the vessel. So you could say it's still not 100% autonomous. There's also the surroundings you need to think about, all the vessel traffic centrals and the other vessels that are not unmanned, that are maybe not following the rules and the collision regulations. So you must be able to interact with vessels that are unmanned. So we do foresee there's going to be support from a shore control center for a long time. For the 100% unmanned, those will be going on the seabed mapping and other tasks, maybe surveillance tasks. So, and as we discussed also a bit last night, that this is, for the ocean-going fleet, it's a long way until we have 100% autonomous vessels or unmanned vessels. Maybe never. It's for the short sea and the predictable routes at the moment.
And you mentioned some concerns there. What are the key security concerns and solutions to autonomous ships?
Yeah, well, today, you know, the captain, he's using his own experience, which is very valuable, to judge any situation that comes up. And he takes the necessary course of action. So what we need to do now with technology is trying to replicate that into an autonomy brain. But there's still people doing it, right? So the people will have to program the software to act in the right way. The idea is that if there is loss of communication between the vessel and the shore control center, or if there's any failure on the vessel, that the vessel will be pre-programmed to go into a safe state, meaning maybe dropping anchor, maybe going into the nearest port, or maybe continuing on the route that was decided. But of course, all the options that you might have with your surroundings, how other vessels may act, anything that might happen, you need to play out all these scenarios and program the vessel to act accordingly. And therein lies the challenge, because it's still people doing this, and do we really cover 100% all the optional issues that might arise? This is a key concern.
All right, and what will autonomous ships mean for the insurance industry and the assignment of liabilities arising from incidents?
Thank you, George. Well, autonomous shipping is obviously the biggest revolution in our industry, but there are concerns and challenges for marine insurers. First of all, we will be relying upon connectivity. And there will be no onboard breakdown response capability or no onboard casualty response capability. So what is the damage control immediately after a casualty? This will result in bigger casualties and more wreck removal duties by the P&I clubs. So having limited onboard cargo care capability is also a big concern, because no human intervention alone brings some risks, especially as to repairs to reefer containers. Technology failure is always possible, and we are relying upon the technology always working. Cargo theft, no crew overseeing cargo operations to prevent theft, and on liability for cargo loss and damage, legal framework has not yet developed, although IMO is working on this. As Pia mentioned, there is a cyber vulnerability and increased vulnerability to piracy attacks. These vessels will most likely be attractive targets for cyber fraudsters, and greater potential for vessels to be held to ransom and or target to be to the malicious attacks. And we are expecting a risk shift from traditional marine to product liability. Then product liability insurers should be working to have the insurance in place to cover potential losses due to technology failure leading to an incident. On the Admiralty claims perspective, obviously autonomous vessels will be operating in the same space as the manned vessels and will be subject to other ship human error. For this, the legal framework has not yet developed. Any collision or grounding involving an autonomous vessel will face challenges as to seaworthiness and ability to limit liability. On training, there aren't any regulations or formal training programs for autonomous vessels. That should be a big concern. IMO regulatory scoping exercise, although it will consider this area as far as my understanding. For marine insurers, regulatory compliance is fundamental, and existing international conventions and regulations have all rules that talk about the roles and duties of the seafarers. Therefore, IMO will need to decide whether the existing conventions and regulations need to be adopted or whether new ones would deal with the autonomous vessels be introduced. But behind every dark cloud, there is a silver lining. Now, what is it that the marine insurers really hope with the autonomous vessels? Well, our expectation, first of all, is eliminating human error emanated major casualties. Autonomous vessels will introduce a reduction to the potential for such incidents where causative factor was human error. When the international group carried out a large casualty exercise, I believe they updated it in 2016, they worked on 26 casualties, major catastrophes, occurred since 2002, involving liabilities exceeding $40 million US. And what they found out was 70% of those casualties resulted from human error. It's quite sobering statistics. On the crew claims, I guess we won't be seeing personal injury, illness, or death claims anymore. From the American Club's point of view, 25 to 35% of all claims experienced per annum is injury, illness, and death claims, which is mostly related to the crew. And piracy attacks all showed us that crew remain vulnerable and valuable targets for international criminals. If an autonomous vessel is seized by pirates, there's no crew to hold for hostage or to use as leverage for ransom. And there will be less risk for bunker spills due to usage of fuel alternatives such as batteries and fuel cells. Speaking of bunkers, we would be seeing a big reduction on disputes resulting from stem and bed bunkers. And as we all know, that's one of the hottest topics lately since the middle of 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberto, what can be done to existing vessels to automate more systems and lower cost? What is the cost of installation and conversion to affect these changes?
Okay, so the first part of the question, which is how can you lower costs through technology? The answer is just not very straightforward because investing in technology cannot guarantee any return on investment, if you're being honest. So what technology is a better tool to handle processes. So for instance, if you had a very clear view on your mobile phone of what's going on in the vessel, and you could very quickly react to any problems that might occur in its operation, then you can't put a price or a cost to that information as it's part of your daily operations. What can happen though is you can automate a lot of processes, and that's some sort of return on investment, such as reporting and troubleshooting that can happen automatically now. And also as you create more transparency between the crew on board and the people working on shore, then you can create more trust between the two parties and avoid the many problems that might occur by either not reporting, problems that happen on board, or processes that are not compliant by the crew. So for instance, if someone doesn't change the fuel changeover in an HACC area, that can lead to huge fines and can arrest the vessel for many days, which is a huge cost for the company. So, and the last part of the question, which is about the cost of this installation. So if we consider monitoring as the first step to making your vessel digital or bringing to the new digital age, that's about $40,000 to $50,000 of an investment to gather all the data from sensors on board and transfer them onshore. Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
much.
And last question on autonomous ships. As they get more and more complicated and you have more and more technology, do you require higher crew costs because more specialized crew and better trained crew are needed? I want to open this up to Pia and then response from the whole panel.
Could I just make one more comment to the cybersecurity part
course.
that was addressed very well by Müge? You know, those vessels that we're looking at now, they're being built from scratch, and they're being built to be cybersecure. Every component is tested and is made resilient. And this actually, you could say it's an easier target for, not for the traditional old-fashioned piracy, but for terrorists perhaps, or cyber attacks. But it is also built to be, you know, counterfeiting that. While existing vessels, the fleet that's sailing around now, is actually could be more of a risk of cyber attacks with a lot of connectivity, and also the crew pose a certain risk in how they interact while they're on board. So that's just one comment. Back to the crew and the need for the crew on semi-autonomous vessels, you might say. Well, you know, we all have cars that have evolved drastically over the years. There's more and more automation built into our cars. We don't need additional training for that. It's actually quite self-explanatory. The car will give you alerts telling you what to do. Of course, when the car breaks down, that's where you have a problem. You can't fix it yourself, like you probably could in the olden days. So you'll have to get a specialist to help you fix the car. I assume it will be similar on vessels where you have a high degree of automation. That actually is going to help the crew. It's taking away all the dangerous, dull, and dirty work is automating that, leaving the crew to have a more interesting job, leaving them to make best use of their time. I don't foresee that it's going to be that much difficult to handle. And you know, we've had also a very increasing degree of automation on ships, while you might say the skill set of the crew has gone the other way. So it's just taking this a little bit further. But one last comment on, we are now discussing with the Norwegian maritime authorities and the class societies about the requirements for the crew that we will be having on shore, that will be supporting several autonomous vessels. And clearly, it's going to be quite high demand on that kind of competence. So, so far, the authorities in Norway are saying they want to have somebody who's a trained master, who has been sailing for a lot of years and has all this experience. And they also want this person to have an additional training in cybersecurity, in data handling, in certain other aspects. So we do foresee actually that in the medium term at least, these people will have a high competency and a high salary, so certain cost. But of course, they can handle more than one vessel, maybe 6 vessels. So the OPEX is still much, much more attractive than having 3 crews on each vessel rotating.
Thank you. Now moving on to data and AI. Roberto, what are the varying data points being gathered by companies now? What will this expand to encompass?
Okay, thank you, George. So at the time being, mainly companies gather data, first of all, from the vessel, so from different machinery on board, as I mentioned earlier, main engine, generator engines, manual valves when they're operated, and that's one part. Another is about crew. That varies between companies if they do some tests, either skill tests or psychological tests to crew members, about supplies and the cost of supplies. So what's happening now is we're having very sophisticated data, but very separated from each other. So for instance, we might know really well, we might have information about the operation of machinery on board, about the supplies that go in, and about the crew members or engineers operating them, but these data points are not integrated. So what I believe the main difference will be is not that we're going to have extra data points. So for instance, I don't think that having sensors to monitor emissions is going to be the big difference. The big difference is going to be integrating through algorithms all of those data points. So for instance, when a problem of an engine occurs, so the probability of a main engine failure will depend on the main engine, the maker, the model, etc., and its operation, the crew member and the engineer operating it, as well as the origin of the supplies in the last overhauling. So you will integrate all of that data to have a much more comprehensive understanding of the problem and the cause.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, I want to ask Evan, who owns the data that is gathered? The ship owner, the service provider, and what happens when a service contract is terminated between a ship owner and a service provider?
This is an area where we see a lot of stress in the market, in the sense that, you know, historically, especially in shipping, where information and insight can provide that competitive edge for a company to be successful, we're in an era where, as companies adopt technological solutions provided by third parties, elements of their business processes become more widely available, known, or understood, and also data that's collected or used in one set of processes can then be transformed into benchmarking data services and other services, to where all of a sudden the competitive edge of certain players is eroded, and also the landscape tilts in a way to the larger players. For example, to see today that the world's largest shipbroker is talking about a cloud solution, much like Adobe Cloud offers you a full suite of solutions for your desktop and publishing. It shows you the power of being able to aggregate that information. I believe that in terms of ownership of data, traditionally companies want to own and control their data, much like we want to own and control our personal data. And yet, if any of you use Facebook, if you have an iPhone, if you search on Google, that data is not yours, it's theirs. If you do a blockchain project with IBM and you read the terms and conditions of the project, you'll see that the data as part of projects you do with IBM are intellectual property of IBM, which they can then use to augment their other services and tools. And so one of the real challenges today is, how do we, as companies, create and produce and control our data so that we protect the competitive advantage that we have as a company, while at the same time benefiting from publicly available or externally available data sets that can improve our visibility and insight.
Sorry, I just want to add to that. Sorry, just 1 second. That's a very good thing, though, because when Facebook uses information from all of us, it uses it to have better advertisements or create a better profile of the individual member of the Facebook society. What that means, though, for shipping, for instance, is if one company, a service provider, owns all the data from different problems that occur in different engines, then it can transfer learning from one vessel to another. So, for instance, one problem might occur in one vessel due to its operations, and if you own the data and can analyze it, that you can transfer that learning to a very different vessel and an owner that might have just a new vessel with 1 month worth of data.
Thank you. And we've been talking about the data accumulation. How is this vast amount of data to be sifted, compiled, and utilized to create valuable product or change management style or practices for a ship owner? I want to start with Pia and then maybe have Roberto follow up on that.
Yeah, well, I have quite a concrete example from Wilhelmsen. We have Wallenius Wilhelmsen is actually the world's biggest operator of ro-ro carriers. They've got around 150 of those vessels. And each vessel has around 64 fans ventilating the cargo space. And those fans are located inside a ventilation shaft. It's difficult to access them. What we're testing now is putting on wireless sensors on the fans to measure vibration, temperature, etc., to try and figure out when we need to clean those fans. And then the crew can actually open up and do the cleaning manually and increase the lifetime of these fans. The cost of having a fan repaired from shore is around $2,000. So it's a lot of money that can be saved if you're using sensors and you're accumulating data and you're predicting a failure before it happens. And as you said, you can learn from one ship to the other. You can learn from one crew to the other, which is today not the fact. I mean, the vessel is its own little company sailing around there with its own crew, and they're all different. All vessels are very different. But then you could gather mass data, you could learn, you could predict, and you could save a lot of unforeseen cost. We also are getting a new classification notation from DNVGL about not having to do periodic maintenance, but condition-based maintenance. So that also means that your cost of having everything controlled on board, it will go down, and the lifetime of your equipment will most likely rise. So I think for ship owners, every ship owners, and all ship managers and ship operators, they definitely have a potential to save quite a lot of money if they use the gather data and use it for preventive maintenance.
All right. And what are the potential danger points in a breach of security for the data? Does this create security risks? Or is it purely commercial? And Evan, I'd like you to address this.
Well, first of all, what we find is, as an industry, we're a very globally competitive industry, and many technology solutions and service providers exist in many parts of the world. At the same time, the experience that companies have with securing systems as we develop on new platforms or mobile and web varies significantly. We've seen in security audits that we've done, for example, that there are some companies that provide cloud-based voyage management or vessel operations systems where, in fact, the data is not secure. So theoretically, someone could go in, change the bank details for your charter hire payment one time, and have hundreds of thousands of dollars get wired to a rogue bank account. This is a real risk that exists today, and that people hadn't realized when they created the tools and secured within the framework that they know about. There's a lot of talk, if you look at the work that the FAA and other air national service providers are doing in defining legislation around drones and drone corridors and ensuring that there's no overlap between drone and commercial aviation airspace. A lot of the concern is what happens if someone intercepts a signal, reprograms an autonomous vehicle to transport to a different location or perform a different task. And I think similarly from a cybersecurity point of view, what happens if someone shuts down a main engine or or does other damage whereby on the software side, it doesn't seem like a big thing, but it can actually impact what's happening to a vessel as it's moving, as it's in port.
Something to add to that, and what Pia mentioned earlier, although autonomous vessels that are being built now are much better at handling cybersecurity and they're cybersecurity ready, as they say, the main difference is that if something does happen in an autonomous ship, there is no fallback by a crew member. Whereas even though now ships are not as secured digitally, if anything happens, first of all, you can fall back to the crew, and second of all, very, very few vessels have automated operations that influence the operation of the vessel. So at the time being, we're just having snapshots of what's going on the vessel with no action taken from the shore on board.
Thank you. And a last question on data and AI for Müge. From an insurance standpoint, could a program be implemented with real-time data is used to reduce insurance costs, whether it be P&I, hull and machinery, similar to what the car insurance industry does for safe driver discounts?
I guess we can call it ship handling telematics or performance monitoring. And that might be the future for the underwriters to take interest in. Underwriters may see benefit in analyzing fleet data for vessels on risk. But would the underwriters give a discount on premium for that? Maybe. I understand that this has been research for the container industry to monitor internal container conditions and containers' position aboard the vessel for monitoring cargoes such as reefer cargo or high-sensitive cargo. And it's been lately discussed for cargo insurers that with insurers considering offering discounted premium if shippers include real-time monitoring equipment for preventative measures. But with respect to P&I cost involving terms, conditions, and premium is experience-driven. An adoption of new technology would confirm results over a period of time. That's unless real-time monitoring equipments are so tested that they say they would completely remove a potential for collision or fixed and floating objects claims. But an initiative supported by the industry and the regulatory bodies is certainly welcome to, most importantly, to improve safety of life, environment, and property. Safer working environments would have positive impacts on claims, which in turn would influence P&I and also hull and machinery premiums rate trends downwardly. Well, having said all these, I must add that I foresee a great level of skepticism from the conservative shipowning community. They might question whether the insurers are becoming too involved or too controlling, or whether the collected data somehow would be used against them or to increase premiums due to some undiligent vessel operations. Although I don't think that would be a justified worry because our main objective is protecting our members' interests.
And I want to open that up for a comment from the rest of the panel.
I think you don't have to look any further than the right ship vetting system owned by Cargill, Rio Tinto, and BHP Billiton, whereby many of the ship owners felt very dismayed that their ships are rated on what seemed to be an intransparent rating tool, which has continued to evolve. It's not, but at the same time, from the industry's perspective, they say, hey, this is, my information is being used against me to force down charter rates or to not employ my ships. So the pressure and the concern is very real. Whether it's perception or reality, the concerns are there.
But if you have a very high quality operation on your ships, you should probably have a lower premium, right? So those companies would welcome it.
Thank you. And for last topic, which is a little bit of a smorgasbord, 3D printing, drones, and sort of new horizon technologies that can affect shipping. How would the maritime industry benefit from both drone technology and 3D printing from the day-to-day ship operations? What difference will they make in services and costs? And I want to open this up to the whole, actually, maybe starting with Müge and moving all the way down.
Sure, thank you. Well, drones will revolutionize the landscape of shipping, and they will quickly become a regular tool in the maritime industry because potentially they will reduce cost, increase efficiency, and reduce the risk to human lives during essential maintenance. And they can be used to identify ship defects while at sea. I believe both UK and the US navies are using drones for this purpose. And that would incredibly reduce time and maintenance costs. By using drones, we can get instant feedback, and inspection of the most inaccessible places will be possible without the use of safety equipment that would otherwise be required for human inspectors. And some drones are capable of operating in intense weather, which means it could be able to gather critical information regardless of storms or bad weather conditions. And say there is a wharf damage case, we would be able to use a single device to capture information in and out of the water instead of hiring a separate divers to measure the damage, for example. And I think drones will also allow users to better protect their assets, such as cargoes and the ships, and we can use owners can use them during cargo operations. For example, when you're discharging rice cargo in West Africa, you can use drones to avoid pilferage or avoid stowaways. That would be, getting rid of stowaways is very challenging, and putting them overboard is not an option. So they would be very helpful also in the rescue mission, assist with man overboard response, and they will be a cost-effective alternative to hiring launch services when every time a ship needs few documents or a few spare parts. Usually launch services cost around $1,500 as opposed to drone services have been estimated as little as $150. And a natural extension of drone technology, I believe, is the autonomous offshore utility vessels, which could lead to a reduction in accidents and deaths by removing people from dangerous conditions and situations aboard the ship.
Thank you. And Evan?
I think of these technologies, what's the impact going to be, big or small, in the next 5 years or beyond? With 3D printing, the impact will be large. I think it may be longer than a 5-year horizon, but it will be large in industries such as the offshore oil and gas, anywhere you're dealing with very high value asset where downtime is extremely expensive. The ability, or also for military vessels, actually, I believe there was a recent 3D printing test done for a military vessel. That's where you're going to see, I think, the biggest impact for 3D printing. Similarly with drones, where you're going to see a real transformation is already, we've seen that underway with inspections of vessels, but also in securing our ports, right? The ability to have undersea drones that are monitoring and detecting each of the vessels going by, whether contraband is attached underneath the hull, or doing port security monitoring. I believe that that's going to be transformational. To the ship owner, I don't believe that these will necessarily be hugely transformational. The two areas that I would focus on in the next 5 years, if you're a ship owner or if you're involved in the commodity production, trade, or transportation, the two main areas I would focus on are you must understand blockchain and how it will transform the world, and you'll see many of the biggest oil companies, ship owners, and commodity traders have already done blockchain trials. And then you also need to understand the value of data capital and how you harness and access it. And Henriette from Clarkson said, cash, in this latest era, cash is king. When I started in shipping 18 years ago, cargo is king. It was really drilled into my head. Cargo is king. And today, cash is king. Tomorrow, data is king. And for those organizations that don't know how to acquire, store, analyze, and use it, you won't be here.
Roberto?
Yeah, that is actually a very, very good answer, Evangelos. What I actually want to add, though, is that I don't believe it's one technology by itself that is going to revolutionize the shipping industry, but it's a confluence of technologies that can work together. So for instance, you can have a drone that takes pictures of cargoes or water to assess the state of the hull, but if you don't have sufficient algorithms to analyze the data and provide the necessary quantifiable results, then I don't think there is a lot of value in the drone in itself. But if you actually collaborate with many different technologies, then the true value can emerge. But I actually believe a lot what Evangelos has said, that the data is the new king of the future, because if we assume that the vessel's value now depends on the operation and the company that has been operating it, if the data can depict what the operation has been of a vessel, then that means that in the future the value of the vessel will not be just the asset on its own, but the asset accompanied by the data that actually depicts its operations. Yeah, thank you.
And to finish off our panel, Pia?
Yeah. So in Wilhelmsen, we are testing both these technologies right now. So we're flying drones in Singapore together with Airbus. We have a partnership with them, and that's instead of the launch boat. So it's a 90% cost reduction, as you mentioned, Müge, more or less. And it's also increasing safety because you don't need the boarding officer to walk up and down. We're also invested in a 3D company, a 3D printing company called Ivaldi. Actually, they're based here in the States, and they're experts in metal composite printing. So we're testing with a lot of our customers now. They have, equipment on board that's more than 10 years old, where there's a small part that breaks, and it's not supported by the OEMs, and it's long lead times, and you actually sometimes have to buy a whole new piece of equipment. So we have a 3D printing factory also in Singapore, where we do print on demand. Easily replaced parts that has very, very low cost. I think 3D printing actually has a big potential to disrupt our industry. But for Wilhelmsen, being in the car carrier industry is actually also a threat, because if you can 3D print car parts in the end, you can do a lot more local manufacturing of cars. You don't need to ship those cars across the oceans anymore, and then actually our fleet will be obsolete. So I think for this, technology is your friend, or technological change is your friend, is the topic of this session. And I think it's, for all the companies out there, it's important to start cannibalizing on your own business before somebody else does it, before Amazon comes in and disrupts everything in shipping. We need to start testing out new solutions, even though it's a threat to our existing business, because otherwise we won't survive.
Thank you. And we're out of time, so sadly no time for questions, but I want to thank all the panelists for joining us today.
Thank you, George.